Good morning, children. Welcome back. So, today we will continue the second chapter. But before moving forward, let's have a quick recap of what we have read in previous class. So, in previous class, we have read about primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. And we also have discussed that primary sector of the economy include any industry involved in the extraction and production of raw material like farming, forestry, fisheries, and animal husbandry, quarrying, mining. And then we also have discussed about secondary sector, which include all the activities that transform raw material into finished or valuable product. Um, for example, manufacturing of anything or textile manufacturing industry, construction are example of secondary sector. And we have also read that tertiary sector is the service sector, which is which provide help to primary and secondary sector. All the services, whether it is provided by vendor, barber, cobbler, police, army, doctor, lawyer, teacher, come under the service sector. Apart from this, transportation, communication are also come under tertiary sector. And these three sectors are interdependent on each other, means the growth of one sector lead the growth of other sector. In primary sector we required machinery, equipments, fertilizers, and all these things we get from secondary sector, means all these things are manufactured in secondary sector. And for transporting raw material from one place to other place, we require transportation system or communication system, which are the part of service sector. In the same way, in secondary sector we required raw material to which we manufactured in a valuable goods, and all these raw material we get from primary sector. And again, for the movement of employee or for transporting raw material to industries and the finished product from industry to market, we require transportation system and communication system, and they all are part of primary as well as of tertiary sector. And in the same way, tertiary sector depend on primary and secondary sector, because if there will be no growth of primary and secondary sector, there will be no use of tertiary sector. And in previous class we have also read about GDP, which is known as gross domestic product. And GDP is the monetary value of all the final goods and services produced in our country during a particular year. And today we will read about historical changes in these three sectors. So let's begin today's topic. It has been noted from the histories of many developed and developing countries that at initial stages of development, primary sector was the most important sector of economic activity. It means in previous time, the main occupation of the people were agriculture, fishing, and forestry, which were the part of primary sector. Means most people of whether it was developed nation or developing nation were engaged in primary sector. But with the passage of time, there was the shift from primary to secondary sector. As you have read in your history book that in 18th century industrialization started in Europe, and from there it spread to different part of the world. And with this, factories came up and people started working in factories, because there they got the permanent job, their working hours were fixed, and their salary was regular or their income was regular. So people started working in factories, which were the part of secondary sector. Hence, secondary sector gradually became the most important sector, and there was a shift from primary to secondary sector. And in past 100 years, there has been a further shift from secondary to tertiary sector, mostly in developed countries, but in developing nation also. the service sector has become the most important in terms of total production, and as primary and secondary sector developed, there was a need of better means of transportation, better means of communication, medical facilities, educational facilities, which are the part of tertiary sector, and now people started working in tertiary sector. So there was the shift from secondary to tertiary sector. So this was the change in the sector from primary to secondary, and then from secondary to tertiary sector. And now we'll see that which sector has a major share in GDP of our country. So we'll move forward to the next topic, which is primary, secondary and tertiary sector in India in terms of their share in GDP. So for that we will see this graph which is given in your book. This graph shows the production of goods and services in three sectors, that is primary, secondary and tertiary sector. This is shown for 2 years, which is 1970 to 71 and 2013 to 2014. If it is written in your book like 1970 to 71 or 2010 to 2011, that will also correct. The years are different, but it doesn't matter. You can see how the total production has grown over the 40 years. So let's see this graph. If we'll see in 1970 to 71, the contribution by primary, secondary and tertiary sector was around 10 lakh crores, which has been increased in 2010 and 11, and the contribution by primary, secondary and tertiary sector in 2010 and 11 was 50 lakh crore. And one more thing we can see in this graph, that in 1970 to 1971, the share by primary and tertiary sector was almost equal. But in 2010 and 11, the share by tertiary sector has been increased. So this was the change in our GDP in from 1970 to 2010. If we'll take the present situation in present time, or in the recent data which was given by central government, the total contribution from tertiary sector is highest, that is 53.66%, and in second number comes secondary sector, and the contribution by secondary sector is 31%, and at last come the primary sector which is 16%. But there is a reverse situation, that in most people of our country works in primary sector, and its contribution in GDP is less. On the other hand, in most of the contribution comes from tertiary sector, but very less people work in tertiary sector in our country. Because of that, we see the disguised unemployment in our country, about which you have read in previous class, that most of the disguised unemployment we can see in primary sector. And you also know that because of the pandemic, at present the Indian economy is passing through a tough time, but it is expected that our country will recover from this slowdown very soon. So it is much clear from the graph number 2, from the above graph, that the contribution by tertiary sector in GDP has been increased in past few decades. And if we'll see the downward graph, still most population of our country engaged in primary sector. Means primary sector provides the highest employment in our country. On the other hand, production is highest from tertiary sector, and in present time, the tertiary sector becoming so important in India. Now the question is, why is the tertiary sector becoming so important in India? For getting the answer of this question, we have to move forward to the next topic, that is rising importance of the tertiary sector in production. As we have read in the previous topic, and we can see in this graph that over the 40 years between 1970 to 71 and 2010 and 11, while production in all the three sectors has increased, but it has increased the most in the tertiary sector. Because of this, in the year 2010 and 11, the tertiary sector has emerged as the largest producing sector in India, replacing the primary sector. Because in previous time, the contribution by primary sector was highest in GDP, but in present time or in 2010 and 11, the contribution by tertiary sector in GDP has been increased, and there are several reasons behind this, that tertiary sector has started gaining the importance in India, or the production has increased in tertiary sector. What are these reasons that we are going to discuss? So first reason is, in any country, several services such as hospitals, educational institutions, post and telegraph services, police stations, court, village administrative offices, municipal corporations, defense, transport, banks, insurance companies, etc. are required. These can be considered as basic services. In a developing country, the government has to take responsibility for the provisions of these services. See, in developing country like our country, all these services are under the control of the central as well as the state government, and it is the duty of the government, or it is the responsibility of the government to provide these basic services to the population of a country. And when government start investing in these basic services, so to improve the condition of the country, to improve the condition of the people of the country, automatically tertiary sector started gaining importance, because all these services come under the tertiary sector. Second, the development of agriculture industry lead to the development of services such as transport, trade, storage, and the like. As we already seen, greater the development of the primary and secondary sector, more would be the demand for such services. Already we have read in the previous topic that the development of primary and secondary sector lead to the development of tertiary sector. If any one sector will start gaining importance, or if any one sector will develop, automatically the other two sectors will develop, because all three sectors are interdependent on each other. As primary sector or secondary sector in our country started developing, automatically we required more services like service of transport, trade, storage, and automatically tertiary sector started gaining importance. Third, as income levels rise, certain sections of people start demanding many more services like eating out, tourism, shopping, private hospitals, private schools, professional training, etc. You can see this change quite sharply in cities, especially in big cities. When the income of any person increase, that person demand more means of entertainment, like that person start demanding more services like eating out, restaurants, tourism, shopping, professional training, etc. And all these services are part of tertiary sector. In past few decades, the income of the people has increased in our country, whether they work in the primary sector or in secondary sector or in tertiary sector. So they start demanding more services, and automatically the production in tertiary sector has increased. Fourth, over the past decade or so, certain new services such as those based on information and communication technology have become important and essential. The production of these services has been rising rapidly In chapter 4 we shall see example of these new services and the reasons for their expansion. IT, information technology, which is related to computer, and as in past few decades this type of services which related to communication technology or information technology have become important and essential, as you can see that more call centers has been opened, service centers has been opened, so these all are the part of tertiary sector. So these are some reasons that the production in tertiary sector has increased, and the contribution by tertiary sector in GDP also increased in past few decades. But there's a fact about India. While there has been a change in the share of the three sectors in GDP, a similar shift has not taken place in employment. Still, as we have read in previous topic, that most population of a country engaged in tertiary sector, or share of employment in our country is higher by primary sector. And one thing also you must remember, that not all of the service sector is growing equally well. Service sector or tertiary sector in India employ different kinds of people. At one end, there are a limited number of services that employ highly skilled, educated workers, like the workers, those who work in information and communication technology. On the other hand, there are a very large number of workers that engaged in services such as small shopkeepers, repair persons, transport persons, the helpers, those who work at your places, and these are the people, those who earn less, they are forced to work in the service sector because they do not have any other alternative opportunities for them. Still, most of the population of a country engaged in primary sector, already disguised unemployment is there in primary sector, means the number of people are more than the required person in primary sector. Hence, only a part of this sector is growing in importance, those who earn well in service sector. So children, that's all for today's class. Like always, you will get some question answer with this video. That question answer you have to do in your notebook, and rest of the topic we will discuss in next class. Till then, take care of yourself. Stay home. Stay safe. Thank you, class.